My question is, how relevant is the fact that the rise of nationalist far-right governments in Europe has been created by the Syrian refugee crisis of moving over 1 million refugees into Europe, and how correlated are those from your perspective? And secondly, what can advocacy organizations do to disentangle the question of crime and poverty and all of the issues that they feel are associated with the influx of these refugees and the actual work ethic that they have and what the actual results have been on the ground?
And can I piggyback? It's crime, poverty, and terrorism that is often exploited. And your ancestors were from Belgium, and Belgium has been one of the places where this has also been used politically.
So look, the truth is it's been exploited, and there's 3 or 4 points that one has to understand. First of all, Europe's biggest problem is not that 1.5 million people arrived. Europe's biggest problem is that it had ignored the refugee crisis in 2013 and 2014. Despite the Pope going to Lampedusa, in 2015, when 1.5 million people arrived, there was no European package ready to address that. And we all know in policy that if you're playing catch-up, you're losing.
Right.
So the biggest thing to understand is Europe has been scrambling to catch up. If it had been put in place proper entry and exit systems, proper systems for distributing refugees and immigrants around the continent while their cases were being developed, we wouldn't be in this mess. Secondly, we're living in the shadow of the global financial crisis. I mean, remember, Italy, Greece, Spain, Portugal have suffered monumental losses in GDP per head, in income per head. Youth unemployment in Spain, I think, is still above 50%. So there's an economic backdrop to this that is real. Thirdly, there's no question that European governments are paying the price of a failure to distinguish between refugees and economic immigrants. And I think it's really important that we understand that 65 million refugees and internally displaced, 25 million refugees in total, 3 million asylum seekers. There are 250 million people crossing borders at the moment for economic reasons. And it's not inhumane, it's not wrong to say that there's a different moral and legal obligation to the baker from Damascus who's bombed out of his bakery by his own government, or the girl in northeast Nigeria who's chased from her home by Boko Haram. There's a different moral and legal obligation to that person than there is to someone who's seeking to move across a border for a better life. It's not that one is good and the other is bad, they're different. And they carry different legal and moral obligations. The key to being able to put those different obligations into practice is processing cases quickly. You've got to be able to have an assessment of the individual case. And Germany is now, Peter Wittig is here, he's the German ambassador. The time it's taking the German authorities to, I'm not saying that because you've got to answer all the questions, Peter, about it, but Germany is now processing 8 to 10 weeks to get an asylum claim processed. In the United States, it's now 286 days. There's no excuse for that. In Greece, there are people who've been waiting on the island of Lesbos for 3 years to have their case processed. And so Europe has made its own position difficult. Final point is, there's no question that those 3 factors have all been, that those confusions, those latenesses are being exploited in an effective way. But here's the word that is critical, and I bring my Brexit trauma to bear on this. The key word is control. If the population thinks that the government is in control of a situation, then it might think the government is right, it might think the government is wrong, it's not going to tip over the apple cart. If the people think the government's not got control of a situation, then you've got a problem. And I think that's where there is a link to the US debate about your responsibilities to refugees versus your responsibilities to the 11 million undocumented.